You say you believe in Jesus, but you wouldn't last a single day living the way he did. Stay until the end and discover, like never before, the true meaning of this symbol the world has tamed, but that was born as a revolution.
Yeah, I believe that Christ's suffering and the demonstration of the kind of physiologic stress that his human body was under is manifested in the Garden of Gethsemane, where it's described that he was sweating blood. And there is a well-documented medical condition in which patients who are under tremendous amount of emotional stress and physiological stress can in fact sweat blood, because little blood vessels within the glands burst and then the blood is expressed. The scourge involved the use of a short whip with pieces of typically metal, sometimes bone, sometimes pieces of porcelain wrapped in these leather straps, which is then utilized to come across typically the back, the shoulders, the legs of the victim. And the first few passes across a particular body part would tear through the skin, the fat, but eventually, once the outer layers were torn away, it would start getting in the muscle and the tendon. And of course, along the way, you're ripping through all the blood vessels that supply all those tissues. And so you're losing blood the whole time. The plant that was described actually had a very long thorn, not the little thorns that we would think from a rose bush. These were thorns that were typically 1.5 to 2 inches in length. The scalp is one of the most vascular portions of our body. It's got a huge blood supply up there. So then having those thorns shoved down into the, down onto the bony plate would have gone through all the scalp, which in and of itself would have created a huge amount of blood loss. I've seen people actually bleed to death from just a scalp injury. So this is not a small injury to have, who knows, dozens of these things shoved into your scalp. And so that would have caused more blood loss. Typically when a victim has to carry the cross, what has been described in the literature, in actual Roman literature, is they describe, they carry the crossbar. And the crossbar is estimated, alone, was estimated to weigh about 110 pounds. And of course, if your arms are stuck out here, wrapped up on the crossbar, and you fall down, you need help getting up. You just can't get up on your own, because there's no possible way without your arms to get up. So he would have needed help getting up. If he fell over, there's a good chance that he could have hit his chest, which then could account for the possibility of a cardiac injury. Anatomically, we consider the wrists as part of the hand. And so with the placement of the nails between the radius and the ulna, at that position, it still fits the definition of being in the hand, and it's in a position in which the nail won't rip out, which you have to have a solid point of fixation. Another interesting point about the placement of that is the median nerve goes right straight through that particular portion of the wrist. And so there would have been either destruction of the nerve or impingement of the nerve that would have created a tremendous amount of pain, so that every time you try to take a breath, it'd be agonizing. You'd be pushing down on spiked feet, which of course hurt, and then you'd be hanging on spiked arms. And so you alternate from excruciating pain to excruciating pain every time you take a breath. So even if he survives the actual crucifixion, he would have had to survive what I believe to be a lethal injury from the spear to find out whether he was alive or not. What's described is the loss of water and blood, and that would entail either a pleural effusion or pericardial effusion, and the blood would have come from either pulmonary artery, a pulmonary vein, the aorta or vena cava, or the heart itself. None of those injuries, unless you're treated immediately by a trauma surgeon like myself, with all the advanced equipment that we have, would be survivable after even a few minutes. Christ, as the Son of God, could have survived anything. He chose to manifest himself as a human at that point in time and allowed himself to die. And being human at that point in time, he could not have survived this particular series of traumas. It's not possible. Christ as God could have survived anything they threw at him. But he chose to be Christ, the human, at that point in time to die for our sins. And that given that self-limitation of remaining to be human, he died. He did not survive the event. I'm profoundly impacted by it. Because I realized the price that he paid was something I would never be willing to do for probably anybody. It's very difficult for me to even sing songs about the cross, even in worship. Because I truly do understand what he paid, the price that he paid.
You think he came to save you? He came to expose the cowardice of your comfortable faith, to expose your hunt for blessings while he embraced death, to expose your obsession with being accepted while he was spat on, denied, and forgotten. You think faith is about relief, peace, and spiritual protection, but the cross doesn't protect, it reveals. It shows what happens to those who don't bow, who don't compromise, who don't stay quiet, who understand too much before their time. Jesus didn't die for romantic love. He died for non-negotiable conviction. He wasn't a lamb, he was a threat, and that's why they killed him. He challenged systems, broke rituals, exposed hypocrisy, and because of that, he became unbearable to those who profited from the lie. The subversive figure was hijacked and turned into a symbol of submission, used by institutions to domesticate consciousness. What was once rebellion became dogma. What was once courage became passivity. And if he came back today, he'd probably be rejected by the very people who claim to follow him. Because spiritual clarity is still dangerous, especially when it's real. And instead of learning, you turned that blood into decoration, turned that silence into liturgy, turned the cross into an excuse to stay small. If the cross doesn't humble you, then you've understood absolutely nothing. Jesus didn't die to spare you from hell. He died to show you that heaven demands everything, and no one gets there unscarred. The image of the cross, repeated millions of times throughout history, has slowly been drained of its original meaning. What once symbolized confrontation, agony, and defiance has now become a pretty necklace, a decorative piece on a wall, or just an emoji at the end of a routine prayer. But the truth is, the cross was never meant to soothe. It was meant to disturb. Because at its core, the cross is a mirror. It doesn't show you salvation. It shows you what you don't want to see about yourself, your contradictions, your faith shaped by convenience, your resistance to real sacrifice. The cross exposes the gap between what you say you believe and how you actually live. That distance between belief and behavior is exactly what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called despair. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind, the one that hides in the everyday life of someone who's just trying to keep up appearances. For Kierkegaard, the greatest spiritual mistake is living an unexamined life, ruled by inherited ideas instead of lived truth. And really, what's more inherited and less understood than faith built on symbols without confrontation? When truly looked at, the cross calls out your cowardice. It's not a shelter, it's a direct challenge to your spiritual comfort zone. If Jesus had died peacefully, with no blood, no crowd screaming, no trial, no public humiliation, maybe it would be easier to keep believing that faith is just a smooth journey toward enlightenment. But he died, in the most brutally exposed and shameful way possible. Because it had to be that way. The pain had to be visible. The world had to see the price of an authentic conviction. And even today, if you can look at the cross and not feel uncomfortable, that says more about your comfort zone than the faith you claim to have. The cross is not an ending, it's a reflection. And a whole lot of people would rather shut their eyes than face their own reflection. The problem isn't believing in Jesus. The problem is handling what that actually means. Because believing in him isn't about repeating phrases, attending services, or memorizing verses. Believing in Jesus, if taken seriously, is a symbolic death sentence. It means letting go of comfort, applause, and social safety. Jesus was rejected by the religious, discredited by politicians, abandoned by his friends, and cast out of his own community. He didn't just talk about love. He confronted the kind of love that only counts when everyone approves. And when that got too uncomfortable, they eliminated him. Carl Jung said most people spend their lives trying to avoid the psychic pain of facing their own shadow. Jesus, on the other hand, dove straight into it. He didn't run from the tension between light and darkness. He embodied it. And that's exactly why his image is still so misunderstood. Because it's easier to turn him into a gentle symbol of spiritual comfort than to recognize him as a mirror of our deepest fear. Being rejected for daring to be authentic. You wouldn't last a day being Jesus, because he endured everything you spend your life trying to avoid. Erich Fromm wrote that freedom is frightening, because with it comes the responsibility to choose consciously, without leaning on the crutches of the system. Jesus was free, and that made him dangerous. His freedom wasn't just spiritual, it was existential. He spoke with prostitutes, touched lepers, ate with traitors. He wasn't chasing acceptance, he was chasing truth. And truth has a cost. It's no coincidence that the man who said, "Deny yourself," was the same one denied by his own. He didn't die just for our sins. He died because living the way he lived was intolerable to a world addicted to appearances and control. The scariest part of Jesus' story isn't the crucifixion. It's what they did with it afterward. Rebellion became doctrine, pain became ritual, subversion turned into protocol, and the most challenging figure in history was transformed into a symbol of submission, carefully reshaped to fit into the very structures he once confronted. What was once a threat to the status quo now comforts people who would never dare sit at the same table as the real man. They killed Jesus' body 2,000 years ago, but the quieter and more twisted death was the death of his rebellion. Michel Foucault said that power doesn't disappear, it transforms. And maybe the clearest example of that is what happened to institutionalized spirituality. The faith that began as a movement of resistance against the Roman Empire was eventually absorbed by other empires. The cross, once a symbol of shame and defiance, became a royal emblem, church decoration, political currency. And with that, the living force of the gospel was gradually tamed into something palatable to the very kinds of power Jesus once stood against. What used to be liberation became control. What used to be questioning became blind obedience. Nietzsche, in his analysis of Christian morality, said the problem wasn't Jesus, it was what they did to him afterward. According to him, institutional Christianity traded vitality for resentment, courage for guilt. And today, when we look around, it's hard not to see the echo of that. How many people live oppressed by a spirituality that doesn't set them free, but instead shapes them to fit into predictable systems? Rebellion was turned into routine, the cross was sanitized, and the living, rebellious, uncomfortable Christ was replaced by a passive, silent, harmless icon, a product packaged with religious approval, ready to be sold. There's a kind of faith that only works when everything is fine. A faith of promises, blessings, and instant positivity. A faith that can't handle silence, doubt, or absence. That kind of faith doesn't survive the desert, because it was built only for the garden. But Jesus never promised gardens. He promised a cross. He promised loss, confrontation, detachment. And still, most people prefer to believe in a God who protects them from pain, rather than one who walks through it with them. That's why so many fall away at the first sign of suffering. Because it wasn't faith, it was a contract. And when the contract isn't fulfilled, the devotion expires. In behavioral psychology, there's the concept of positive reinforcement, the brain's tendency to repeat behaviors that bring pleasure or reward. Modern spirituality has often been shaped by this principle. Uplifting songs, motivational quotes, quick emotional highs. But real growth doesn't happen on the surface of pleasure. Neuroscience shows that emotional resilience is built precisely through facing discomfort, frustration, and uncertainty. And that's where faith reveals itself, not as anesthesia, but as clear presence within the pain. A God who punishes more than he forgives isn't divine. He's just an extension of the system. If they had introduced you to a God who inspires, maybe you would have become great. But they sold you one who watches your every move, and you learned to crawl. You learned to call the fear of doing wrong faith. You called the fear of punishment love. And now you kneel, not out of reverence, but out of fear. That's not spirituality, that's conditioning. The idea of God, in many religions, doesn't reveal divinity. It reveals the deepest fears of man. A being who punishes, judges, watches, and imposes rules isn't there to enlighten. He's there to oppress. He wasn't shaped as a symbol of transcendence, but as a tool for control. A distorted reflection of human authority, projected into the sky to keep the herd with their heads down. That God doesn't want you free. He wants you submissive, disciplined, self-monitored. A God who sees everything, knows everything, and charges you for everything, turns existence itself into a moral minefield. And the worst part? They place that watchman inside you, disguised as your conscience. Now you feel guilt before you act, shame before you think, fear before you live. God became the sophisticated name of your repression. This desperate search for spiritual safety reveals something deeper, the fear of your own vulnerability. When pain arrives, many don't pray, they negotiate. They don't surrender, they make demands. They want God to take the anguish away, but don't want to understand what it's trying to say. They prefer promises over process, miracles over maturity. And the saddest part is that by avoiding pain, they also avoid transformation. Because real spirituality is above all a crossing, and no real crossing happens without loss. Faith that can't handle pain is deep down just convenience dressed up as belief. There's a kind of clarity that doesn't fit just anywhere. A sharpness of spirit that makes people uncomfortable, that lifts the dust from under the rugs and lights up the dark corners everyone would rather avoid. Jesus had that clarity. He saw beyond appearances, beyond the rules, beyond the well-structured lies of religion and politics. And he paid the price for it. He was seen as a threat, a problem, an exaggeration. Because the world tolerates almost anything, except someone who refuses to live anesthetized. Clarity, at its core, is a form of disobedience, and anyone who sees clearly will sooner or later be treated as dangerous. Existential psychology shows that the more awareness a person develops, the more responsibility they carry. Viktor Frankl said that freedom without responsibility is an illusion. Jesus understood this and carried the full weight of being who he was without compromising his integrity. And that's the problem. People like that are rare and unbearable to most. Because someone who lives with clarity unintentionally exposes other people's mediocrity. Someone who won't stay silent forces others to hear truths they've been avoiding. Someone who refuses to lie, even out of convenience, shakes the foundation of those who depend on lies to survive. That's why Jesus keeps getting rejected, not for being radical, but for being too clear. Clarity demands courage, because seeing the world as it is and still choosing not to be corrupted is one of the hardest things anyone can do. Most people can't handle it. They'd rather live in illusion. They prefer the comfort of the crowd, religion without confrontation. morality without sacrifice, faith without surrender. But Jesus didn't take any of those shortcuts, and that's why he remains exactly what he's always been, a thorn in the conscience of anyone living halfway. Those who truly understand him don't idolize him, they imitate him. And that's exactly why he keeps getting crucified in many different ways every single day. If none of this made you uncomfortable, maybe you didn't really listen. Because this video wasn't made to comfort you, it was made to confront you. And if the story of Jesus can still be told without stirring any discomfort, then something is deeply wrong with the way we're hearing it. The problem isn't the cross. The problem is that it became a decorative object when it was meant to be a sharp mirror, a daily reminder of everything we're still afraid to lose: status, belonging, control. The cross doesn't ask for admiration, it demands surrender. It doesn't want to hang around your neck, it wants to be carried on your back. What you do with this now says way more about you than about any doctrine or religion you claim to follow. Because the moment you hear this truth, it becomes your responsibility. And it doesn't matter how many excuses you've learned to give, how many verses you know by heart, how many masks you've worn throughout your life. Deep down, you know, there's a version of you still hiding behind a comfortable faith. And until that version breaks, the cross will remain just a symbol, not a revolution inside you. So tell me honestly, could you really handle living the way Jesus lived? Or is everything you call faith just a code of behavior so you can be accepted? That's the question only you can answer. And I invite you to do that in the comments, not with rehearsed lines, but with honesty. Because this space here isn't a sermon, it's a mirror. And maybe by putting into words what this stirred in you, someone else will see themselves in it too. If this reflection hit you in any way, leave a like. That's not just a gesture of support, it's how this message reaches more people who also need to be shaken awake. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone you know is ready to step out of the comfort bubble of faith. Because as long as the world keeps selling spiritual anesthesia, clarity will always be an act of courage. And courage is exactly what the cross demands.